What's the dumbest thing you've seen someone do to their vehicle? My old mechanic had a guy come in with a Ford Probe. He claimed it was low on oil. They take the dipstick out and the whole stick has oil on it. He checks again with the same result. The guy took the oil cap off and looked down into the hole and said, "See, it is low." He had put 3 to 4 cases of oil into the motor trying to fill the entire block up. The previous mechanic didn't know how to patch an exhaust leak and had tried to weld a Rockstar can around the leak. The leak caused the second oxygen bank to fail, which is why they tried to patch it with the can. Not a week later, the bank read a failure again. You don't weld it on, you use some sealant and a couple of Jubilee clips. How the heck do you even weld an aluminium can? Was he using TIG? This definitely won't be the worst one in this thread. I used to know a 30-year-old who would put the car air freshener duct-taped outside the exhaust, kinda just dangling in front of the opening. His logic was that it would make the exhaust smell better for pedestrians. That is oddly sweet, which was also the fragrance he was going for. Had a customer once who had their oil light come on and couldn't figure out how to top up the oil. He thought it might have worked like his boat motor, so he poured a jug of oil into his fuel tank. What would that do to a car? Fiery, dramatic explosion, or just engine damage? Assuming enough oil was added that it won't even start, but it was cranked a lot, possibly not damage the engine, but a lot of work to fix it. Drop gas tank, dump and clean. Clean fuel tank sending unit, replace filters. Flush fuel lines. Remove fuel rail, clean injectors and the rail. Clean intake manifold, pull heads, clean heads and plugs and valve train. Possibly pull exhaust manifold and clean that if any oil got through to there. I'm honestly not sure if it would even get past the injectors though. Depends on how much he added and how well mixed it was. There might be a couple of sensors to replace as well. Expensive, time-consuming, but I don't think it would do anything fatal to the car. I wrench on bikes, not cars, and at least once a month we have someone come in that put chain lube or grease on their brake rotors because they were squealing, and now they want to know why their brakes aren't grabbing. Oh my god, I love this so much. I'm a cyclist and a moron, but somehow I have never managed to plumb these depths of stupidity. And the sad part is that I'm all but certain someone must have done this to their car as well. I was working at a performance shop at the time, 2010. Golf GTI comes in for lack of power and throwing check engine codes for underboost and several for fuel trim management conditions. Did the typical process of checking the turbo wastegate operation, pressure and smoke tested the charged side of the turbo system for leaks, tested fuel pressures, all checked out. Removed the intake side from the turbo to inspect for rips in the rubber boot, all good. Looked inside the intake boot and this moron bought one of those Turbinator gimmicky things and put it inside the intake. It had turned completely on its side and was restricting 80% of the airflow. Removed the obstruction and motor operating values returned to normal and power was restored. Didn't feel any guilt that this idiot had to pay a few hundred for me to diagnose and remove his awesome DIY performance mod. Not a mechanic, but former service writer. Woman comes in for an oil change, some common minivan, nothing out of the ordinary. Walked by the van while it was up on the rack and noticed one of the tires was nearly bald in the middle, cords showing. Textbook overinflation. I checked the tire pressure, was well overinflated. Then looked around the vehicle, 2 more tires were in exactly the same state, overinflated and showing damage from it. The 4th was a bit underinflated, no glaringly obvious tread wear. Pointed it out to the customer when she came back and asked if there's a reason 3 tires would be overinflated. Long story short, she was occasionally seeing a low tire light on the dash, no indication of which tire, just low tire, told her husband and he just aired up all 4 tires. Happened again and fixed the same way, rinse and repeat. So over time they kept the tire with the leak going but managed to ruin the other 3. Buy a tire pressure gauge if your car doesn't give you a per tire pressure reading. Completely fill their engine with oil and wonder why it's smoking and then locked up. Or put oil in the fuel tank because that's what they did on their lawnmower. My mom filled the oil with water when the car was overheating. She said that she knew it said oil, but she didn't know where else to put the water. She was just making some mayonnaise. Oh, the list is long. Removing PCV hose, assorted vacuum lines, O2 sensor, thinking that they're going to get better performance, cutting a wire under the dash to hook up a stereo, then bringing the car to me to fix the taillights, pouring 3 quarts of oil in but the dipstick still shows low because they put the oil in the radiator, putting gasoline in a diesel truck, again. That, again, just tops it all off. You think people would learn, but sometimes not, and those stories can make the best jokes. Did a co-op at a shop back in high school. Guy complains about how his car doesn't sit straight. We pull it in and don't even need to put it on the lift to realize that he has 17-inch rims on one side and 15s on the other. Took me about 45 minutes of explaining to him why cars aren't made like that before he told us that he'd be taking his business elsewhere. On a side note, the side with the 15s were like 100% bald, like racing slick bald, and everything in that car was falling to pieces. I have too many stories of crap I found in people's cars there, but this one has to be my favorite. Wait, he knew it was that way and he thought it was fine? What? I need to know more. Pretty much, he thought that it just had to roll. Honestly, I probably could have put shopping cart wheels on and he wouldn't have given much of a crap. Bit of a stretch, but you know what I mean. I bought my car off a guy for $785. For all intents and purposes, it worked fine, but the guy said it overheated almost daily. 99 Nissan Sentra, manual, 135,000 miles. If it didn't overheat, it would have been closer to $3 or $4 grand, maybe even more. I bought it anyways because I could try fixing it and because I was desperate for a car. My old one died and I lived 10 miles from work. So I brought the car home, the guy filled the radiator per an agreement we made, and the overflow tank was already empty. I started feeling along the coolant piping, and when it came to the thermostat sensor housing, I could stick my fingernail inside the gap. My fingers came out soaking wet with coolant. Went to a parts store, spent $10 on a housing gasket, $3 on some liquid gasket, and $50 on new oil, a new oil filter, a new air filter, radiator cleaner, and coolant. Spent an entire day putting that gasket in. The reason it took so long is a fricking story and a half. That was all about Murphy's Law. Changed the oil, cleaned out the radiator, and I haven't had any trouble since. All in all, a perfectly working car for about $850. I kind of feel bad for the guy who sold it to me. I brought a diesel Mercedes for $250 because the timing chain snapped. I bought it for parts, but it was a nicer car than what I had, so we were going to do an engine swap. Then I noticed the timing chain hadn't snapped, the belt tensioner had failed, and the timing chain cover had failed. Replaced the cover with one a friend had, got the car on the road for the price of an oil change. Maybe fork out for a mechanic's visit before you chuck your vehicles on eBay, people. If there's an easy fix, you could at least make another few hundred off the sale. Worked as a car cleaner at a dealership one summer in high school. Guy towed in a relatively new, top-of-the-line Corvette he had bought there sometime before I started. He was teed off that it had died on the road and had been running like crap before that. Ranting and raving about how he spent all his money and it only went X months or years before completely breaking down. One of my work buddies got up on a lift and started looking it over. He opens the oil drain plug and nothing comes out. He pulls apart the engine and the oil could now be described best as glue. Owner talks to the guy and asks when was the last time he changed the oil. The guy had zero idea what he was talking about. He had no idea you had to do that. He assumed that you just added gas and that's the only thing you need to do. The engine was a complete loss, which meant that the car was a complete loss to him. If there's one thing I can take away from all these stories, it's that it's pretty astonishing how many people don't know or care to get their oil changed. I have a story for this. Some years ago, here where I live, there was a fairly widespread craze of mixing oil. I don't remember the type, but it wasn't at all related with the engine, like sunflower oil or something like that, with diesel, for better fuel consumption. The thought was that this kind of oil would burn anyway, and mixed with diesel it would give the same kilometers for less money. Of course, it wasn't the brightest of ideas, so I remember that despite being fairly young, I remember strongly advising against this practice. My mother didn't listen to me, then proceeded to top her Mitsubishi Pajero Turbo, great car for fuel economy, I know, with whatever oil she used. Now to be fair, the car held up pretty well despite the abuse, which is because it was a tank. However, it eventually succumbed. If I remember correctly, the fuel pump completely failed and had to be replaced entirely, but I might be forgetting stuff. The funny thing is, though, that the mechanic, after looking at the engine for about 3 minutes or something like that, asked almost angrily to my mother if she was using the oil. When questioned how he knew that, he said something along the lines of, "It's the fourth this week that comes in with this issue." Had a guy show up at a tire shop bragging about being blackout drunk and needing his tire changed. He had his spare on with 3 out of 5 lug nuts. He had tightened them by hand and they backed off. Had to replace all of the studs. Folk would come in asking for tire repairs or patches on tires that were literally cut in half. Like you drove on the rim for a week split down the middle in half. They'd get so offended when I explained that they not only needed a tire, but now a rim as well. I've seen a fake intercooler on a Sunfire, paper mache used instead of a Bondo, the list goes on. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a guy bring in his motor-swapped late 80s F-150 for some transmission work. These came factory with either a 300 straight 6, 351 V8 or 460 V8. He put 2.3-litre carbureted 4-cylinder out of an old Ranger in it. The reason behind the swap was that it would improve the fuel mileage at the cost of some speed. That thing could barely move under its own power. If you floored it, it would top out at about 55 miles per hour, wide open, and take a good minute or two to get there. Not a car mechanic, but I know a guy who used self-tapping screws to fasten a roof rack to his car. A few people have asked if it worked. Yes, but it leaked. I would not recommend it though, because the roof sheet metal probably doesn't have much load-bearing integrity. He must have run out of duct tape. Or crazy glue. Not a mechanic, but a car enthusiast. Saw a couple of cars where owners didn't know what basic maintenance was. Like no oil change, no brake pad change, the oil turned into jelly and you had to scrape it out. The most ridiculous thing were the brakes. My mechanic friend showed me the brakes of an elderly lady's car. The brake discs were gone, like almost completely wiped down to 5 or 6 millimeters. She said to him, "The car feels weird while I brake." If that sweet little old lady wants to drive around like that, nothing's going to stop her. I don't know, a brick wall probably would. A lady stated that her car said low coolant, so she filled up the coolant. She made it about a mile and the car started running terrible and cut off. Shop rollback picked it up. She filled up the coolant by removing the oil cap and topping the motor off with water. Let me tell you about Diamond Plate Guy and Focus Bro. Diamond Plate Guy had two things he used to modify his truck: a drill and a ton of diamond plate. It was an absolute base model V6 Ram 1500 with the exhaust chopped off, which I thought was bad enough until I opened the hood. He had drilled or glued diamond plate to every surface: air filter box, intake manifold, fan shroud, etc. This was 18 months ago. My eyes still haven't recovered, but this isn't the end. He had some crappy wheels that he'd painted white himself. I know this because he painted the inside of the wheel where it seats to the hub, which caused them to seize to said hubs. I literally had to buy a bigger hammer to smack them off. The Focus Bro, the guy had a custom straight pipe with full Sparco race seats, 5-point racing harnesses, lowering springs, and a base model automatic Ford Focus SE. There were any number of dudes I knew fresh out of high school who would buy their second-hand run-down cars and soup them up in garbage like this. It's a real first paycheck move for a certain kind of guy. While sitting in the shop waiting for my own car to have work completed, I witnessed a customer and their mechanic talking about the customer's car needing suspension repair. The customer had tried, unsuccessfully, to do the repair himself. The mechanic asked him why some lug nuts were missing and others were loose. The customer replied how he thought he would be helping the mechanic by loosening the tire for him. The customer had driven 20 minutes to get to the shop with a tire held on by a few loose lug nuts. Not a mechanic, but we do almost all of our farm equipment maintenance. Brother called during a hellacious snowstorm telling me, "Hurry, get over here and bring beer." I arrive with Bud Light in hand. He's got 2 lawn chairs under his carport. We get a beer and settled in our chairs out of the snow. We commenced to watching his neighbors that were on crystal and higher than kites push this Mustang. They were trying to push start it. After about 10 minutes, we're hysterical. They'd been trying for almost 2 hours. It was an automatic transmission. You need to send an invite out to the rest of us next time. I'll bring the snacks. You can push start an automatic. It just has to be going faster than a manual. Dudes spending thousands of dollars modifying their pickups for off-roading, even though they spend 99.99% of the time on highways, and the furthest off of a road that they ever get is a logging road that a stock Forester could tackle with no problems. And then they complain about extra crappy fuel mileage and having to pay for new 35-inch knobby tires that only last about 10k miles because they wear super quickly if you mostly drive on pavement, and having to replace their front wheel bearings every other year because those larger wheels and tires are a lot heavier than the stock ones, and being super surprised to learn that parts for a 3/4-ton pickup can cost multiple times more than the comparable ones for a small sedan that they sold to afford their bro truck. I used to live in a small southeastern city and see a lot of suspiciously clean and undented bro-dozers driving around. What I wonder about these guys is, doesn't the tire noise drive you fricking insane? It's probably not something they even think about before getting the pickup jacked up to fit those 35-inch big blocks, but I would regret it so hard. I'm a rancher in Kansas, and before that I worked in the oil field going to rigs on soft dirt roads in the middle of nowhere. My trusty 04 Dodge Ram 4-wheel drive with everything stock and slightly more aggressive tires has been all I've ever needed to get through mud. If I couldn't get through it, you needed a tractor to get through. I fight the mud multiple times a year, and I still won't waste a cent on those lifted-up D-bag canoes that are driven by micro-PP wannabes. Service advisor here. Customer brings in a car last week Wednesday with a shaking issue. Cool. Take care of some of the issues the car actually has. Leave 10 times better. Issues include bad axles, TSB on diff, dirty transmission fluid, brown rear shocks, needing oil service. Done and gone. We listed the recommendations still required, but customer declined, only did axle and diff fluid service. Today, the same customer over the phone, "What in the fricking heck did you do to my car?" What's the issue? The issue is back and it's fricking 1,000 times worse. Why did I pay you? Okay, well if it's our repair that caused the problem, we're more than willing to see what's going on. We didn't replicate anything after test drive, so unfortunately we can't determine if it's the same issue without checking it out. I demand a tow truck be sent out and you guys have to flip the bill on this. I'm not paying for this nonsense. Sir, not a problem. If it is work we've done, we're happy to pay for the tow and correct the issues. But be advised, if the issue is due to other recommendations or a new issue, you'll be responsible for the tow fee. Yeah, that's fine. I know it's what you guys did anyway. Me. Okie dokes. Tow truck will be there within the hour. The tow truck picks car up, notices the issue, tells customer, notes it on the receipt, the customer signs and acknowledges it. We'll come back to this in a second. He gets the car, punctures on the rear right outer tire sidewall, nice welt and gash the size of a penny, tire completely deflated, tow driver noted this, told customer and wrote it out and had customer sign it, grabbed the air hose, hook up to tire and just wheezing air out. Me. Well then. Yes sir, you had a flat tire where you were driving on it. Nope, not possible. It left here fine, and I barely drove it home and it sat since I picked up from you guys. According to the receipt, you acknowledged the puncture with the tow truck driver and signed it off, knowing it was flat. But we did install a spare, drove about 10 miles on the street and freeway, and we cannot replicate the issue at this time. I can hear the customer trying to find the receipt, and he hangs up. Guess who just paid $75 on a tow bill? Ah, I see one of our male Karens made it into this story group. It's always nice to have a paper trail leading the blame back to the complaining customer. If only all of life was so satisfying. Mechanic here, lots of stories. One guy has OCD and got a license plate called Too Clean. Only let one guy in our shop touch his base model Dodge Dakota 2007. Had to double up on gloves and he would watch. Undersprayed his car with chrome spray. I work primarily on equipment. Operator calls out to his machine saying he had a crack on his boom. Think the first arm on a large excavator. I get out there and the whole boom has broken off and is on the ground. My favorite, though, had to be the operator who blew a hydraulic hose in a forestry setting. Maybe $200 to change the hose. Decides he wants to walk the machine out to make the hose easier and runs the machine out of oil, blowing up the hydraulic pumps, $26,000, 2 travel motors, $8,000 each, and the auxiliary pump, $2,500. The machine was down for 2 months for him deciding to walk an extra 50 meters out of the bush so he didn't have to walk the extra distance. I have tons of stories about lazy operators, but this is probably the laziest. Guy was convinced his tires were different sizes because they were rotating at different rates. Like he jacked up each wheel and put the valve stem at the top, went for a drive and they were not lined up anymore. I had to explain it with chalk and string in the parking lot. Bad snow day, for whatever the frick reason, we were open. Guy pulls up needing a flat repair. He pulled up in a way the car could just be pulled in. Co-worker goes to pull it in and can't stop, slams into his box. Wasn't going fast enough to damage anything. The car had 0 brakes. I say something to the customer. Oh, the foot brake? That hasn't worked in years. You have to use the handbrake. We inspect the vehicle and discover it doesn't even have brake calipers in the front, with the hoses clamped off and not an ounce of brake fluid in the master cylinder. And the most surprising part? They didn't want to have the brake repairs done. A customer brought their vehicle to the dealership I used to work for an airbag recall. They had bedazzled everything on the interior dash, including the covers for the airbags on the steering wheel and on the passenger side. I'm not sure she understands the fact that airbags have enough power to turn anything into shrapnel. I worked at a Chevy dealer and now work at a Jaguar and Land Rover dealer. I'm not surprised at people's stupidity anymore. More than once I've seen people add oil to the coolant reservoir. I've seen the inside of a motor where the customer never changed the oil since it was new, and the car had 50-something thousand miles on it. The dumbest thing I see every day is people come in with broke suspension parts, bald tires, and no brakes. They don't buy any of it and just want the oil change and insist we're trying to rip them off. But the same person will come in raising heck over a small safety recall and refuse to leave until it's done because the car's unsafe. Lady had a brand new at the time Subaru and was complaining about horrible gas mileage. People complain about gas mileage all the time and it's usually because of driving habits. I get the car in and it looks like she's hit something in the road and ripped a big hole in the gas tank, and all the fuel she put in poured right out onto the pavement. It was in fact a valid poor fuel economy complaint after all. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.